So looks like we are in. Hi everybody, welcome to today's session of UPSC Buffet by Gallant IAS. Today we are going to have an interesting discussion because the kind of questions that we are going to discuss are not strictly very factual, but we will put our, the kind of logic and everything that we have learned so far into best use. And taking cues from these questions, we can prepare well in the upcoming examination, and we'll focus more on the logical side of things with this session. So without any further ado, let's get started. So we'll be discussing few things right off the bat. Today we'll be discussing more on the logical deduction of these questions, or how to approach these questions logically and takes certain cues from these core themes. Like I discussed in the last session, there are core themes that are repeated every year. So we'll take some inspiration from that, and so we'll plan our studies accordingly. So first question, which of the following statements correctly explains the impact of industrial revolution in during the first half of 19th century? Okay, at first, if you are not very careful, there is one very key thing that you will be missing out. That is the first half of 19th century. Remember, UPSC have repeatedly gone with this trend where they are particularly asking about something within a timeline. Because if you miss this question becomes extremely difficult to handle, even if you know the facts, because everything given in the options seem right only. But it's about the timeline. The question is very specific about the timeline. It's not just asking about the 19th century, it is asking about the first half of 19th century. So a 19th century will be anywhere from 1800s to 1899. So the first half will be somewhere between 1800 to 1849 or 1850. So we need to be thinking within that timeline. So the first thing we will be looking at, first we will be going through these statements. Okay, Indian handicrafts were ruined. Of course, we know industrial revolution led to mass production, and it had an impact on Indian handicrafts, because there is no point in dedicating that much of time in handcrafting things, where you can actually mass manufacture things, and it's all about the scale of economies. So this is a right statement, but we don't know exactly. We may not be knowing exactly where this happened in the first half of 19th century. So let's put that particular statement aside. Then machines were introduced in Indian textile industry in large numbers. Did it really happen in that time? The proper Indian textile industry was mostly handcraft oriented, and the textile industry mostly produced what? They were focusing more on producing the raw materials rather than the finished goods. So introduction of textile large machineries didn't happen right off the bat, because we know that industrial revolution started in 1760s, somewhat around the later half of the 18th century, and just within few years we won't be having that much of textiles or machineries being introduced in India. And especially India was not the manufacturing center. Britain was the manufacturing center. India was the raw material supplier. So if you keep that thing in mind, we know that this didn't really happen. Railway lines were laid in many parts of the country. Of course, if you remember that first railway lines from Mumbai to Thane, which is a very basic knowledge that everybody has, it started in 1853. And remember that date. 1853 is the first step of British in laying the railway lines across the country, and it happened in 1853. So that definitely was not in the first half of 19th century. Like I said, first half from 1800s to 1850, and the first railway line 1853. So this is not accurate according to this particular timeline. So based on that, we can eliminate it. And for that, you don't need to be knowing everything about railway lines that are being laid by the British. We just have to know the first railway line. That is a very basic knowledge everybody will be having, and it happened in 1853. Heavy duties were imposed on imports of British manufacturers. Absolutely no chance, because India was the market, the market of the goods that are produced by the British. So they wanted consumerism from Indian end, and they wanted the Indian markets to be as free as possible. And there is no rationale for them to impose any heavy duties on Indian imports. Maybe they could impose heavy import duty on Indian exports. That might be the case, but not the other way around. This is absolutely irrational. This is absolutely a wrong thing. This is not at all in their interest to do that. So we could successfully eliminate all three and arrive at the answer. And this is how you should be approaching questions like this. Don't jump into the answer or something right away based on facts. Even if you know the fact, especially when timelines are asked and the kind of options given are didn't seem like very extreme statements or something that is not outrightly wrong. Except for that third, like the fourth statement, rest of the thing seems very possible only. It's just that the timeline is off. So be careful when attending questions like this. You have to be very cautious about the options and don't just jump into the answer. You have to go statement by statement and eliminate it. Don't make the mistake. And one very important thing, try to underline these timelines very right when you are reading it. Otherwise you will miss it. Especially if you are doing it round wise, there is a good chance that you might be missing this timeline, and this is what makes this question important, or this is what allows us to eliminate options and arrive at the answer. So this is very, very important. Underline these statements right off the bat. Okay, so that's how you should be approaching questions like this. See, looking at this question, it may seem like a very factual thing. Very factual question. You need to be knowing something about the Industrial Revolution, effect of it. But even if you have studied that, there is a good chance that you might mark it wrong, especially this third statement, because this may seem like a very plausible thing, because that's factually correct, just that it's off by the timeline. So keep all of this in mind attending questions like this. UPSC will be asking questions like this because this is the proper application of the historical knowledge you have. UPSC wants officers or aspirants to be worthy of applying their knowledge rather than just learning things. So that's what UPSC is looking at, and UPSC will be asking questions like this. This is what separates UPSC questions from other sort of questions that we usually handle, because they focus more on the application side of things. So learn whatever you are, like I always say, qualitatively. Otherwise you will miss things like this. It's good practice to learn something about the PYQs, especially, and even like Industrial Revolution is being asked. It's a good practice to learn something about it. That's what we are doing with this session. So first, basic things. This is very logical. It's not very factual. You don't have to buy hard things. Just know that the Industrial Revolution has few impact. Of course, most of the impacts were economical, and social impacts followed thus economical impacts. First one is deindustrialization of Indian handicraft. Yeah. British machine goods were cheaper and faster. Indian handloom textiles collapsed. Why? Because handlooms were, though they were pricey, they're good products, but they didn't have the pace. Like the productivity was much less compared to machine made goods. We could be building these handlooms or yarns for the textile industry much quicker using these machine made machines, but the handlooms were much slower compared to that. So handloom textiles collapsed. Remember that. Okay, Indian handloom textiles collapsed, and primarily Indian textiles were industrialized based on these handlooms. Means these looms operated by hands, whereas machine made goods like spinning jenny or steam engine could drive these things entirely without any human intervention. So obviously deindustrialization of Indian handicraft or collapse of Indian handicrafts happened. That's exactly what is being asked in this question. Then India turned into a raw material supplier because Britain was the producer. Like, just imagine Britain as current days China, because they had the machinery, they had the technology, they were manufacturing things like crazy, and they were exporting it to all their markets, especially their colonies. So they were the producers back in the day. Right now that's not the case, but they were the equivalent to China of that time. So they were producers of finished good, but of course, in order to make these goods, we need raw material, and Britain didn't have that much of land to cultivate or supply the raw materials for their mass production. So India with its agrarian base was an exporter of cotton, indigo, jute and silk. Okay, these were the raw materials. So they collected raw materials at a very cheap price and exported it to Britain, produced finished good, import them back to India, sell it at a premium, and what effectively large scale exploitation on both fronts, in the production front and consumption front, happened in India. So we were exploited like anything. So that's one thing, and this led to the drain of wealth, obviously, because profit, salaries, everything. Britain was benefiting out of India like anything, and they were exporting this to back to Britain only. They were not spending their time and effort into developing Indian society or Indian administration or anything. They were not at all focusing on that, because after all, for them, India is like an exploiting, like an opportunity to plunder India. That's it. So India became a market, raw material base, and not a manufacturing economy. So India was a consumer at the end, consumer market for them. So this was the basic impact of industrial revolution. Next one, Vittal Vidvansak, the first monthly journal to have the untouchable people as its target audience, was published by. First reading, you might think that, okay, this is an absolute factual thing and you might have missed it in the current affairs or anything. But this question is very much doable without any factual knowledge. Just have the qualitative idea about the Indian history and especially these people. And among these four, many of you might not have heard about Gopal Baba Valankar, and even when I was attending this examination, I didn't know who this was. And I knew, of course, any aspirant would be knowing Jyotiba Phule, Gandhiji, and Ambedkar. Of course, we all be knowing about them, and we know certain things about them, like certain facts about them, because that's part of the study that we are doing. And Gopal Baba Valankar is one name that we don't usually come across, but this is very much doable because the name itself has got a lot of keys, a lot of clues out there. The name Vittal Vidvansak. Vittal is, it's a name given to, or it's another incarnation of Lord Vishnu, and this particular deity is popular in the regions of Maharashtra. So from that, we know that the one who have written this will be a Marathi. So we can eliminate the non-Marathi first, and of course that will be Gandhiji. So we can eliminate the non-Marathi, and we are left with A, B, and D. And from the name, we should be able to know that this Gopal Baba Valankar is a Marathi, not a Bengali or any other place, because the names like Valankar, Jambedkar, Agarkar, and also Deshmukh, these are all surnames in Mumbai or Maharashtra, Marathi surnames. Just like Bengali surnames, like I said in the last discussion, that Chatterjee, Banerjee, Bose, these are all Bengali surnames. So having that idea really helps, because Bombay Presidency and Bengal were the hotbed of India's freedom struggle. So it's worth knowing about those regions and the culture of those regions. So from that name itself, we know that this Valankar sounds very similar to Agarkar, and thus it would be a Marathi surname. So that's why I didn't eliminate Gopal Baba Valankar and I eliminated Gandhiji. Then moving on, the name itself, meaning that it's Vittal Vidvansak name, it suggests something that related to, or it's mostly Sanatani, like it has got a Sanatani underpinning to it, because the name is name has got a connection to an avatar of Vishnu. So meaning that somebody who has written this might be a religious person. And also it is given that it's the first monthly journal, and of course we know that Ambedkar is somebody who's a very vocal advocate of anti-untouchability movement, everything, but he definitely was not the first person. There are a lot of people who came before him, with this objective of uplifting this untouchable or the marginalized sections of the society. So he definitely wouldn't be the first one to have a monthly journal. He would have had a monthly journal, but it might be at a later point. So from that, we can eliminate Ambedkar. Then we are left with Jyotiba Phule and Gopal Baba Valankar. And again, I told you that somebody who has written a book like Vittal Vidvansak will be having a religious, religious overview or religious affinity. Jyotiba Phule is somebody who's definitely not very religious. He's spiritual, but he's not very religious. That's what we see from his works, his acts, everything, because he was more of a reformist rather than a revivalist. So he was advocating for changes in society, and he was advocating for a more spiritual outlook. So we can, from these two names, we know that there is a less chance that somebody like Jyotiba Phule will be writing a book like Vittal Vidvansak. And using that logic, we can eliminate Jyotiba Phule and we can arrive at the answer as Gopal Baba Valankar. So that's how we decipher this question. And I hope you understood the logic behind this, because we used everything that is given, every clue that was given in this question, like the first monthly journal, and we tried to decipher who the origin or the region of the writer from the name itself, and then we deciphered using these surnames. So this is an application that requires kind of a multifaceted approach, and this is the kind of logic that you should be having. So like I always say, again I'm repeating, qualitative assessment of things are very, very important. It's not just about facts are important, but build your facts and develop these qualitative images or imprints in your mind, so that you can better develop a logical approach and eliminate these wrong options and arrive at the answer. So that's how we do this. See, in the first sight, this question seemed like absolutely impossible to do, but we can do a workaround with this, and this mostly works in most of the questions like this. Again, same logic. This was asked in 2020. A same question was similar, extremely similar question was asked in 2020. In 2020 again. So it's something like Deshar Kada, written by Sakharam Ganesh Duskar during the freedom struggle. Consider the following statement. Very less chance that you will be coming across Sakharam Ganesh Duskar and reading about this book. So there is good chance that you won't be knowing the fact. But again, this question is very much doable. What was the let's try and gather as many clues as possible from the question itself. The name says that Deshar Katha, okay, and Sakharam Ganesh Duskar. Right off the bat, if you don't know about somebody, try to picturize them or try to profile them based on their region, religion, etc., or their spiritual or religious outlook, things like that. The name Deshar Katha doesn't really have a religious underpinning from the name itself. Maybe Deshar meaning something related to a story of a place, maybe from the name itself. Then the name Sakharam Ganesh Duskar, try to profile it. Somebody is having name like Ganesh, Duskar, etc. will most likely be from a Marathi speaking region, because Ganesh or having the names like Ganesh are not very prominent in regions in northern India or eastern India for that matter. So there is a good chance that the writer will be a Marathi or somebody from the Maharashtrian region or maybe Gujarat region. Okay. So that's all we have got from the name itself. We'll try to assess the other statements. It warned against colonial states' hypnotic conquest of mind. Okay, maybe. Anyways, this is written during freedom struggle, and of course, freedom struggle meaning opposition of British by British ideologies, British acts, everything. So it warned against colonial states' hypnotic conquest of mind. Maybe this is a very plausible thing. A book like Deshar Katha will be saying. Okay, though this seems very likely. But we cannot just right away take that as a right option. But okay, this doesn't seem like a wrong statement. That's what we should be having in our mind. It inspired the performance of Swadeshi street plays and folk songs. Again, not very sure, but maybe. Assuming this was written during the Swadeshi movement or during or after the Swadeshi movement. So again, seems possible only, but we cannot choose it right away. The use of Desh by Duskar was in the specific context of the region of Bengal. This is very important. And, right, again I told you that somebody from Bengal will be having certain surnames. And the name Sakharam Ganesh Duskar doesn't ring a bell with any Bengali speaking or Bengali writer. This doesn't seem like the name itself and the name of the play, like the name of the book itself doesn't seem Bengali at all, because the name Ganesh is not a surname or a name that we usually see in Bengali speaking region. So this seems very wrong, and this is the key to open this question, unlock this question. So this is definitely not going to be Bengal. So eliminating that gives you the answer right away, and this is exactly what UPSC was testing. Otherwise they wouldn't have given us the options like these, because this is something that not very popular. Maybe some current relevance was there, but other than that it's not a very popular thing, and you won't be learning about this or coming across this particular book and the author very much. But the UPSC have framed this question in such a way that it has specifically given us a hint how to eliminate this question. So using that, we have eliminated this question and arrived at the answer. So that's all about this question, and this is how UPSC is going to be asking. Even if this question is only 1, only 2, it's doable. Especially we can eliminate this question, and these two things seems very likely. They can go hand in hand, and we can choose the only 2 options based on that also. So even if the question was not framed like this is still doable. Moving on. You don't have to learn about the authors like Gopal Baba Valankar or Sakharam Ganesh Duskar, but try to develop an idea that these people have written books like this. Especially since UPSC have asked, try to remember that Gopal Baba Valankar has written a book like Vittal Vidwansak, and the target audience were untouchable people. So that's the idea that you have to keep in mind. Again, Deshar Kada was written by Sakaran Ganesh. Keep that in mind because UPSC can give a match the following just from combining questions from the PYQs. So for that matter, just remember these names. Moving on. Again, a very logical question that we can approach. This is very similar to the first question that we have discussed, like the impact of industrial revolution. This is again very similar. Indigo cultivation in India declined by the beginning of 20th century. Very important, not the timeline. 20th century, meaning that it's 1900s, early 1900s. So what could be the reason? And we'll go through the options one by one. Peasant resistance to oppressive conduct of planters. Okay, this was there, and British brutally suppressed all peasant uprisal, and that wouldn't have led to the decline of indigo cultivation, because despite the fact that the agriculturalist, everybody was exploited, the resistance alone wouldn't have caused British to decline or do away with the indigo cultivation. That is not a very likely thing, because whatever resistance they faced, they tried to manage it by means of force and other things. So this doesn't seem very probable, but we'll see. If we are not able to eliminate other options, maybe this might be the answer. So we cannot choose anything right away. It's unprofitability in the world market because of new inventions. Unprofitability in the world market. See, British is a very capitalist economy, so they are driven by profit, and they are focusing on market reform, like they are focusing on export-based economy, manufacturing, etc. And if something is unprofitable, they will definitely be not investing their energy into cultivating that or manufacturing or anything. This seems very probable given the economic incentive and the economic direction. Okay, again, we cannot choose it right away. The national leaders' opposition to cultivation of indigo. Again, this and the first statements doesn't go well, like very well. These are the people we are talking who have imposed salt law on us, and we cannot expect them to, just because national leaders have opposed, they decline, or naturally the indigo cultivation decline. Again, this seems less probable, just like the first one. Then government control over planters, and how is this thing declining, cause of decline for indigo cultivation? If anything, indigo cultivation would be booming. Again, this seems very unlikely. And we are left with this option. And we have to test it against the timeline. 20th century, meaning 1900s. By that time, a lot of things have happened. Like the World War has happened. Like World War is about to happen because a lot of economies are developing many manufacturing advantages, technologies are being introduced, and a lot of synthetic materials have been produced, especially synthetic dyes by Germany. And these sort of things can actually drive the market away from cultivating something like indigo, because indigo cultivation is very labor intensive and it's a very difficult process. So if you can supplement that with any synthetic dye that could be mass manufactured, thus it would be very possible. And we are talking about 1900s, where technology is not that difficult, because almost all the European economies are developing things, and that's what eventually led to the First World War, because everybody was technologically very superior. They thought that everybody could go on a war and win a war. So this seems very possible, and since we are left with that option also, this seems very likely, and we'll choose that as the right answer. And the core reason why indigo cultivation declined is because synthetic dyes were invented in Germany, and that became very popular. And if you have something like a dye, why would you take the effort of cultivating indigo and going through all the hassle? So it's basic economic incentive. That's it, not because of their Indian opposition to any of these things. So that's how we arrive at this answer. So remember this, you can approach this question very logically and arrive at the answer. You don't have to learn about anything. And remember the economic side of things, try to connect it with the general logic. That's all about it. Moving on, UPSC's favorite, British Acts. And prior to 2020, they used to ask more about Charter Act. Even in 2023 also, I think they have asked about Charter Act. That was about the Charter Act of 1853. But before that, they used to be more focused on these charter acts, and particular details about these charter acts used to be asked. But now these are not that relevant, but you cannot skip this question, because there is, if UPSC thinks about asking something about Charter Act and in place of 1919, 1909 or 1935 Act, we will be at a disadvantage. And these questions have very little room for us to eliminate options, because most of the time these questions will be factual. So since this is a core area, UPSC expect us to learn or have an idea about basic facts about these things. So try to learn about charter acts after learning about the basic 1990, 1909 and 1935. Don't focus more on these charter acts. Focus on those acts first, then move on to these charter acts. Okay. 1813 Act. We know that with every charter act, the monopoly of East India Company declined. So starting with 1813. So it ended the trade monopoly of East India Company in India except for trade in tea and trade with China. This is the first time the monopoly of East India Company is taking a hit with 1813. Then 20 years later, 1833, this was done with. Then 1853, the complete monopoly of East India Company was ended and East India Company became a administrative body only. So that was happening like that. That happened in 1853 Charter Act. So with every Charter Act, the monopoly or the control of East India Company over India declined. So this is a right statement. You need to know the fact for that. There is no logic for this. Then it asserted the sovereignty of of the British Crown over Indian territories held by the company. Yeah, that's exactly what Charter Acts were intended to do. That's also right. The revenues of India were now controlled by the British Parliament. This is something that if you have read about these acts, especially Pitt's India Act, you know that this was under the Pitt's India Act of 1784. Because much before these Charter Acts, the revenues were controlled by the British Parliament only. Because they, East India Company is not very properly managed. It's a private company only, and they had the control of Indian subcontinent, and British cannot just give that revenue rights just like that. They wanted to control that, and it was under the regulating act or the Pitt's Act of 1784. Okay, so revenue control by the British Parliament happened in 1784 and not in 1813. So it happened much earlier. Remember that. Okay. So British handling the revenue side of things, British Parliament handling the revenue side of things happened much earlier in 1784, because this is particularly relevant in today's in current trend also, because UPSC could repeat something based on this theme, because this is a very important thing. Okay, so remember that revenues of India was controlled by British Parliament by the 1784 Pitt's India Act. Okay, not any Charter Act. So eliminating that will give you the right answer. That's 1 and 2. Okay, so that's all about these acts. And like I said, don't focus on Charter Acts and spend your energy like that. It's better to focus on the modern acts like the 1909, acts after 1900s up until the Indian Independence Act. Focus on that more, because UPSC is repeatedly asking questions based on that and not Charter Acts. But Charter Acts can be asked, and one question we can expect, at most one question. So try to learn it, and if you are learning it, learn it thoroughly. Otherwise, there is no point, because most of these questions will be factual. So it's imperative to learn it thoroughly. Okay. Moving on, with reference to Swadeshi movement, consider the following statements. We know what happened in Swadeshi movement, so keep that in mind. And it happened in 1905. So we know that the timeline is roughly from early 1900s. So that's the timeline we need to be having. Then it contributed to the revival of indigenous arts and crafts and industries. Of course, that we know that. Of course, they wanted things to be more Swadeshi, and they were against these exploitative practices of British of importing, exporting the raw materials and importing the finished goods and and flooding Indian markets, killing Indian handicraft, etc. So this is a right statement. The National Council of Education was established as part of Swadeshi movement. If you have read about Swadeshi movement, this is one of the key aspects of Swadeshi movement, because they wanted Indians to be more educated so that they can be better informed about the drain of wealth and the colonial oppression that they are facing. So this again is a right statement. So we'll choose the right, both 1 and 2 is right, because there is no logical objection to these two statements. This is very much in line with Swadeshi movement, and this is an important fact. But if you have learned about Swadeshi movement, this is not a fact that you will be missing. This is very evident, one of the major objectives of Swadeshi movement. So that's all. Then, with reference to British colonial rule in India, consider the following statement. Mahatma Gandhi was instrumental in abolition of system of indentured labor. And I hope you know that indentured labor, they are like the contract laborers, but on paper they seem like proper laborers, but mostly these were like bonded laborers, slightly different. Their conditions hardly differed from that of slaves, because they were promised some fixed wages, but they were underpaid and overworked. They were properly exploited. These are the laborers, like the Indian origin people who were taken to countries like Mauritius, Fiji, South Africa, where British had large plantations. So they needed the laborers to undertake the agricultural activity, and these people, they were not taken by force. They were taken by giving a promise that they will be paid well and they will be having decent working conditions. But the issue is that was a strictly exploitative practice. Their conditions like barely differed from that of slaves. So Mahatma Gandhi was instrumental. Yes, he was actually very instrumental in abolition of indentured labor, because he has seen that thing back in South Africa itself. Even before coming to India, he was well aware about this exploitative practice of indentured labor. So he was very instrumental in that. That's true. Then in Lord Chelmsford War Conference, Mahatma Gandhi did not support the resolution of recruiting Indians to World War. If you remember it, the Second World War is during the Second World War is when the nationalists were opposing the idea of India joining the World War, or Indians being recruited to the British front. But back in 1919, remember this, because you might miss it otherwise. It's about Lord Chelmsford and Montagu Chelmsford reform. We know that it happened in 1919. So the war in question is not World War II, it's World War I. So remember that. So back in the day, the nationalist, particularly Mahatma Gandhi, was of the idea that if we support Britain in this war and eventually the British front winning this war, Indians would be gathering the confidence of the British Empire, and they will be given the freedom because of the contributions of Indians for the British. But in reality, that didn't happen. This is where the calculations of the nationalist struggle went wrong, and that's one area where British outrightly betrayed Indian promises. So this is something actually right. We may think that Mahatma Gandhi, somebody who's advocating for peace, won't be supporting recruiting Indians for World War. But more than non-violence, Gandhi was more inclined to the idea of Swaraj. So he thought that supporting Britain in this war can actually bring India freedom. So it's better to support it rather than let Britain lose this war and end up in a total chaotic situation. So Mahatma Gandhi and other leaders also thought that it's in India's interest that Britain win the war. Okay, so that's why they supported recruitment of Indians to the World War, and this was an outright blunder. We came to know later. We cannot blame them for that, because back in the day they thought that was the right thing to do. But British, being British, did what they did. So this was wrong, because he did support recruitment of Indians to the World War, and eliminating that will give you the answer right away. B. So that's how we can actually arrive at the answer. But also, we should be looking at the third statement. Consequent upon breaking the Salt Law, the National Congress was declared illegal by colonial rule. Of course, the CDM was one of the most aggressive movements, or aggressively oppressed movements by the British, because, post this betrayal by the British, by not giving the Swaraj that Indians deserved, and they themselves have fought a war for the British, the kind of movement afterwards, like after the World War, took a turn where initially it was about non-cooperation, then it became civil disobedience. I mean that in the freedom struggle was outrightly disobeying the British ideology, and they were the relationship between both the British and the nationalist movement got really hostile, and so they were like outrightly oppressing any sort of movements by them, and this was done right after the Salt Law. So this was something we need to keep in mind, the kind of change in the directions, the relationship between Mahatma Gandhi and the British, because before that, in 1919, during before the World War, like in 1914, 1915, during that time, he was not entirely hostile about British. He had his objections about the British rule, and he was very much advocating about Swaraj. But he was of the idea that there will be a gentleman agreement between the British Empire and Indians. But that didn't happen, and post the non-cooperation movement, the hostilities grew wider, and the British started oppressing the movements very much. So that's how it took a turn. That's all. And remember this, Girmitiyas are the indentured laborers taken to these countries like Fiji, Mauritius, Madagascar, etc. So remember this name, Girmitiyas. Girmitiyas are the name of Indian indentured laborers. Okay, so remember that. And countries, Girmitiya countries are the countries that the countries that had the plantations where these laborers were taken to, like Mauritius, Fiji, South Africa, etc. And that's why we have a sizable population of people of Indian origin in countries like these, okay, especially in Fiji. Moving on, this is something that we can actually arrive at using logic. Otherwise, doing it factually, it's slightly difficult because we need to be knowing a lot of things about these people. But we can actually take a proper logical approach to this question and arrive at the answer. He wrote biographies of Mazzini, Garibaldi, Shivaji, Sri Krishna. Okay, from the names or from the kind of personalities that we are discussing, we can actually make an idea like what kind of outlook this person had. Mazzini, Garibaldi, that they were all militant leaders, and Mazzini is the father of modern Italy, if I remember correctly, and it was all about armed struggle. And Shivaji, of course, an Indian Indian emperor, and he had his own ideals, somebody is having high virtues, etc. Sri Krishna. So all of these things, somebody who can connect, somebody who is aligning very much to a militant armed struggle, and somebody who's on a slightly more leaning towards a religious side of things, and somebody who has been elected to the Central Assembly. This is what we have got from the question keyword, and we'll connect it with the people that are being mentioned. Somebody who's more inclined towards a militant movement or militant leaders, we can eliminate Motilal Nehru because he's a very diplomatic person, and the kind of ideology he had won't be outrightly militant. So we can eliminate Motilal Nehru. Then we are left with Aravind Ghosh, Bipin Chandra Pal, and Lala Lajpat Rai. And if you remember correctly, Aravind Ghosh was not elected to the Central Assembly, so we can eliminate Aravind Ghosh. Then we are left with BNC. Like, I don't know whether Bipin Chandra Pal was elected to Central Assembly or not, but Aravind Ghosh definitely was not. Then we are left with BNC. And among this, Lala Lajpat Rai and Bipin Chandra Pal, they are very similar. We know that they were part of the Bal Lal Pal trilogy, trinity, where they were the ones who were advocating for more extreme stance on national struggle. So they both go well with this statement, like Mazzini, Garibaldi, Shivaji, Sri Krishna, like they both can write something like this. This is where we need to be knowing that Lala Lajpat Rai was one person who was elected to the Central Assembly. Okay, he had his electoral win and electoral success, unlike Aravind Ghosh and Bipin Chandra Pal, because he was a popular leader back in the day, and he inspired a lot of people, including Bhagat Singh, and he had a good electoral success, and that's why he became a more comparing Bipin Chandra Pal and Lala Lajpat Rai, somebody who is having a higher chance of being elected to Central Assembly, that would be Lala Lajpat Rai. And that's how I logically arrived at this answer, and I have eliminated Bipin Chandra Pal because of the electoral performance or the kind of popular figure this Lala Lajpat Rai was. So that's how I arrived at the answer as C. So try to connect the dots, especially learning about Mazzini, Garibaldi. Try to understand what sort of person they were, their outlook, whether they were more non-violent oriented or whether they were militant leaders, things like that. And also the religious outlook, Shivaji, Sri Krishna, there will be a religious underpinning to that. And connecting that, we can eliminate Motilal Nehru, and whatever the options that are given, we can eliminate that. And remember this fact that Lala Lajpat Rai was one person who was elected to the Central Assembly. And I hope you know that Lala Lajpat Rai was died after being a victim of lathi charge against the protest against Simon Commission. So remember that also. Okay, he didn't die of natural causes. He was lathi charged, and due to the injuries he suffered, he succumbed to death after protesting against Simon Commission. So that's all about it. Then again, this is a very repeated thing. Okay, 2017 UPSC have asked, in 2024 also UPSC have asked, but sadly this question was cancelled. But again, it was very similar. Apart from core British Act, it's very important to learn few things, like few other aspects of British rule in India, especially the education under British rule. If it's better to know a timeline about that. how the British education in India has transformed under British. UPSC have asked about question about that also. And also one more thing about these land revenue systems in India. Three major ones are there. We know that Zamindari, Rayatwari and Mahalwari. It's good to learn, and since UPSC have asked about that in 2024, I think the trend still remains and it's very important even now also. And this is slightly factual, but it's very logical only. You can easily eliminate the option. If you have learned something about the land revenue system in India, you can easily eliminate that. The question is, who were associated with introduction of Rayatwari settlement? Cornwallis, Alexander Reed, Thomas Munro. And you know that Cornwallis is associated with permanent settlement or Zamindari system. And eliminating Cornwallis, we can easily arrive at the answer. So this question is not very taxing. We can easily arrive at the answer, but it's not always the case, because in 2024, UPSC have asked a question like this, but this was cancelled because there was a lot of objection based on the right answer. But this kind of questions we cannot expect. The kind of questions UPSC will be asking will be more factual. So it's important to learn about these land revenue system. And they are not very difficult to learn also. It's very easy. And I, in fact, put them. These are directly from my notes. So you don't have to learn everything. Just learn these important pointers and compare it with each and every revenue system, because otherwise it gets too complicated and you won't be able to solve the question. First thing you need to know that who introduced it. So it is Cornwallis. Taking the example of Zamindari system, it's Cornwallis, and timeline also 1793. These two are the important facts you need to know. Then other thing is who paid the revenue, like how this system actually worked. So there will be a Zamindar, and Zamindar will be paying the revenue to the British. So Zamindar will be collecting the land revenue from the peasants, and this will be given to the British by the Zamindar and not by peasants to British directly. So Zamindar was effectively a middleman and the owner of the land was Zamindar. Remember this. And revenue rate was fixed permanently. Okay, that's why it's called Permanent Settlement Act. And also the regions are important. Bengal, Bihar, Orissa and parts of UP is where Zamindari system was there. So if a land revenue system was there, don't think that it was applied across India like uniformly. It didn't, because the systems across India was not very uniform. So this land revenue system was focused more on the Bengal, Bihar side, like the eastern India and parts of UP. So mostly it's surrounded in the eastern side of India. Okay, that's it. If revenue was not paid, land could be auctioned. Okay. Impact on peasants, severe exploitation. Like for most of these revenue system will be exploitative only. And their objective was to assure and stable revenue collection, because giving the Zamindar the authority to collect tax and giving it to British mean that they don't have to worry about collection of revenue, and they don't have to assign collectors for that matter. They could just use the Zamindari system and get a stable revenue. So they can ensure that the revenues are collected and Zamindar will be managing the things on ground. So that's the reason why this system was developed, because they don't have to spend that much energy and time and effort, money, everything in collecting the revenue. So again, we'll revise that. Timeline is important. 1793, who introduced it and how this land revenue was collected, and regions. Okay, the same will be dealing with Rayatwari system. See, I've used the same headers for these two, because these are the kind of questions UPSC will be asking. Look at this. Under the Rayatwari system, peasants were exempted from revenue payment in case of bad harvest or natural calamities. Under the permanent settlement system, Zamindar failed to pay his revenues. Owner before fixed date, he will be removed from Zamindari. Because see, these information we can easily get from these headers, and you don't have to learn in very much long passages, long paragraph, long pages. Just crystallize this information into these headers so that you can easily recollect it. Okay. Again, we use the same headers for that. Who introduced it? Thomas Munro, and early 19th century. So this will be after Zamindari system. Who paid the revenue? Ryot. So here no middleman is there, no Zamindar is there. The Ryot directly paid to the British. And the one good thing about this system was that farmer was recognized as a landowner, unlike the Zamindari system. So farmer was recognized as a landowner in Rayatwari, and revenue rate were not fixed. Here revenue rates were fixed. This was much better, because they could actually adjust this based on the harvest. So it was revised periodically, and the regions were mostly around the southern India. Madras, Bombay, and parts of Assam. Parts of Assam is something, slightly not very logical, because these two regions were, parts of southern India, and only the parts of Assam. So remember this Rayatwari system, not in Bengal or eastern India, it was in southern India, Madras and Bombay presidency. So remember that. And assessment was more qualitative. This is again a slightly good practice compared to the zamindari system, because it is dynamic, and not a uniform taxation was there. So this kind of benefited the farmers in certain ways. The impact on peasant was heavy tax burden during the bad harvest. See, despite the fact that this was slightly better than the zamindari system, the tax burden was still high, because they were most focused on collecting the revenues. They didn't care much about the plight of the farmers. So that was the basic idea. And the reason why we had this Rayatwari system was that zamindars were very corrupt, and there were a lot of leakages in revenue collection happening with the zamindari system, and that's the reason why they have moved on to a Rayatwari system. Not because they were interested in, they were not having anything in India's interest or the agriculture's interest, just that there are a lot of leakages happening. They thought that it's better to have another system in place. So that's about Rayatwari system, introduced by Thomas Munro and Reed. Okay, remember these two names. Thomas Reed, Alexander Reed and Thomas Munro. So they were associated with Rayatwari system. Then comes Mahalwari system, and remember it was by Holt Mackenzie in 1822, and it was modified by William Bentinck. This is a slightly more humane, more a better practice when it comes to revenue system, that has got slightly in the interest of Indian agriculturalist. So compared to these two systems, Mahalwari was the least exploitative. Again, we cannot say that it was very much a breeze for these peasants. They were struggling irrespective of the system, but this was slightly more, slightly better compared to the other two systems. So who paid the revenue? The village actually collected the revenue. The mahals collected the revenue. That's the good thing about this, because instead of the usual collectors like zamindars or British revenue collectors, this is collected by the village. Okay, so that's a good idea, and joint responsibility of the village community. Here the ownership is not vested with the farmer. Based on the PYQs that has been asked, and try to crystallize the information into one pages or a slight short list. Otherwise this gets very heavy and you won't be able to remember the facts. So try to do this while you are studying, and try to make a note based on this. So that's all about it. Thank you, and we'll see you soon.